stopwatch calculator. And then we have it, I've launched an application by Citrix. Okay, so let's close that down. And that's how you create a session. Again, it's very easy to do using your profiles. And again, we would always prefer to use profiles where we can. And I'll show you the structure of the directory. So we've got our thin client section, global directory, which has the shadowing section applied to it, webinar test, which has directly assigned to it the Citrix profile that I created, which is the web browser to the AppGate section or the web interface. And here I have an indirectly assigned object, which is the shadowing policy profile that's applied at the global directory level. And then we can look at the device itself, and you can see we have two indirectly assigned objects, both the Citrix profile and the shadowing profile. The other thing you'll notice now that we have the device connected and we've been using it is all of the attributes and information that was missing earlier on is now populated. So we've got all the IP address information, operating time, these kind of things. So that's all available. We can also see things like connected monitor. Now, obviously, in this instance, my device is running headless, so I have no monitor connected to it. We can see what features are installed within the device and any updates put on a WES device. This is obviously being a Linux device, doesn't have this section populated, and even things like a user login history. But we're not making the users log in on this device, so again, there's no information available in there, but it is available to view through the UMS. Shared workspace, which is listed under the thin client directory. This is an ability. It's kind of like a roaming profile for IGEL devices. So it means that particular user profile settings can be applied to a specific logged in user. So when you can make users log into the device, and then say, for example, they have a particular setting that they need to use, then that can be applied to follow them wherever they go throughout the devices. We also have the ability to define views. So I'll create a new view here, and I'll call this 5.06.100 and above. And I'll make a rule, show all devices that are running above 5.6.100 firmware. Okay, this is a wizard, so we can do this very easily. I'm going to choose firmware version, and I want it to be 5.06.100. And then I want it to be above that. Okay, and then create view, hit finish. And now I should see a view of my device because it's running on 5.07.100. So these views are very useful because you can split your estate quite quickly and look at which devices have had updates and which devices haven't had updates. Now, views can be used for many other things rather than just particular firmware versions. So if I edit this particular view, I can add in other criterion or use a different criterion completely in the first section. I can add new columns and I can separate these out, so I can have any number of different criterion to filter down my very large estate into a particular subset of devices. So this makes views very useful for keeping track of specific sections and subsections of your estate of devices. So with views finished, we can now move on to scheduled jobs. This is under the jobs section, and here I can create scheduled jobs that can do any number of different tasks within my estate. Now in this instance, I'm going to set a reboot job. Obviously, I'll take a drop down from the command box here to do reboot, and I'll set the reboot to happen at 17:30, and I'll call it weekday reboot. We can set things like max threads, timeouts, and a delay for the job as well. So in this instance, I'm going to hit next, and we'll set. We don't have no expiration date, so we don't want this ever to expire, and we want it to happen every weekday. And exclude public holidays, and we can use a public holidays list, which I haven't created at this particular instance, to define when those public holidays are. Okay, and hit next, and I want that to apply to my webinar test group, so move that across into the selected objects, and then hit finish. And there you have it. We have a scheduled job that will apply to any device within the webinar test section of our estate, and it'll reboot the devices every weekday at 1730. Now that could be set to do a shutdown, or even a wake on LAN, or any number of commands that we can use within the scheduled task. So it's very useful for managing a very large estate and managing things like reboots for firmware updates, for example. So you can team that up with moving firmware updates to a particular view of devices rather than a directory. But there we go. So scheduled jobs are very useful for managing large groups of devices within your estate, to do things out of hours or make sure that devices are powered up before users come into the office, for example. Now, the final two main sections that we're going to show you in UMS are the file section and the universal firmware update section. The file section is where we can create files that can be pushed down to the devices. So I can select a particular text file, an image file, or a web certificate just by browsing to it from our server, and then pushing that out to a particular location on one of the devices, or to any number of devices. Now, in this instance, if I wanted to do a text file, I'd choose undefined. If I wanted to do a web certificate, obviously I would select certificate, and there are different sections for certificates. Common certificate will put the certificate in all the certificate locations on the device, so that can be quite useful. And then we can select a specific file location within the thin client device, and also access rights for those, and owners, whether it's root or user within that particular file. And then once you've created that file, you can then drag and drop that onto a section within your UMS to populate that file to those devices. And lastly, the last main section we're going to talk about is the universal firmware update option. Now here we have the option to go and check the internet automatically for any new version of firmwares that are out there for your particular devices. So we'll allow that to go through, and that will search the IGEL pages to check for any devices that are already registered into your UMS, whether there are new versions available for those devices. Okay, so we can see now that it's picked up the devices that I have and the firmware version of firmware. Okay, so you can see now that the universal firmware update has picked up the type of devices that I have and what versions of firmware are available for download. So I can tick that I want to download the version for my UD-LX boxes and hit download, and you see it's going to use the default target directory for UMS_file transfer. Hit download. And you can see that the firmware update has started, and that'll take some time to complete. Now once you've clicked on the OK button, you'll be taken to this page where you will see under Universal Firmware Update that the particular build that you're downloading is in progress, and it shows you a download status in the bottom of the section here. So allow that to complete, which I'll do shortly, and then I'll show you how to deploy that to a device. So now the firmware has finished downloading, and you'll see under my Universal Firmware Update section I now have a 1, and I have my new version of firmware available for deployment. So now we want to deploy this firmware out to our devices. So the first thing I'm going to do is open up my devices, go to my webinar test folder, select my device, and run a shadow session. So I'll hit connect, and we'll be able to see the desktop of that device. Okay, there it is, that's great. Let's move that out of the way for now. So the next phase is just to take the universal desktop version we wish to deploy, drop it onto the webinar test section, and then select when I want these changes to take effect. Now I'm going to do this now, and you'll see when I move my device back in here, we'll get a prompt and hit OK. Now at this stage the device is primed and ready for an update, but it will not actually carry out the update until I do the next important part. So what I do now is right click on the device or on the group of devices. In this case I'll do the device, go to the update section and hit update. Okay, so there's my device ready to update. Press the update button and go and grab my VNC session. Okay, and there it is, firmware update initiated by remote management update now. Hit OK. and the firmware should start to download. Now once the firmware is finished downloading, we'll see the behavior of the device. It's going to want to do a reboot, so we will probably lose our connection to the VNC. There's a number of different parts of the firmware that it has to download, so we'll let that complete and then we'll continue from that point. So you can see now that I've lost my connection to the device. So I'll close the viewer tab, wait for the device to reboot and become available again. Let's check now to see if that device is updated. You can see that the device is checking its new firmware and registering it in the UMS. And we can hit the About section here now. And we can see that the new firmware version 590.100.01 is now deployed on the device. So that's how you update the firmware from UMS on a UD2 device or any one of our Linux-based devices. So with that device updated, that concludes our demonstration of the UMS software, and I'll move back to the presentation. So next on the list is the UDC2 product. This is our Linux-based operating system for thin client applications. So this is essentially the same operating system that we operate on our own thin clients, but available as an installable solution for other devices. It's manageable via UMS, the same as our thin client devices, and behaves in very much the same way, and obviously has access to any number of different VDI or SBC type of clients. It can be installed on a device to wipe it completely from a USB disk or from a CD, or you can boot directly from a USB stick, or even run it as a virtual machine. It has a very large driver support, so obviously the libraries in there are designed to support a broad range of hardware, from laptops to existing thin clients from other vendors perhaps, desktop PCs and even laptops. And you can just download the software directly from igel.com/UDC2. So that concludes the presentation for today. If during your evaluation you have any particular issues, then please contact IGEL directly through the email address shown on the screen. That's presales@igel.com. Outside of an evaluation, please contact IGEL support directly from the IGEL support section on the website, and then you can raise a ticket via our ticket system. Okay, so that concludes the UMS Basics webinar today, and thank you for your attention and your time, and I hope to hear from you soon.